part of Double P Media, doublepmedia.com.
Spoiler alert, this Double P podcast is going to be talking about the first 5 episodes of Season 3 of The Crown. If you haven't seen those yet, you really might want to watch them before you listen to us. Although, if you want to listen to us anyway, we don't care, that's cool, that's up to you. But we don't want to spoil you, and this song might even spoil you, so you've been warned.
You're listening to Podcast Lilibet.
We're talking about the quick change between the seasons 2 and 3. The cast are gonna rearrange. Oh, how will it turn out to be? I don't want no one to know how I might fall out with the show. Olivia scarred me, I went in Nebula and I saw they guard me. This cast alarmed me, somebody feed me, relieve me. Is this the queen I was looking for? We're talking about the quick change between the seasons 2 and 3. The cast are gonna rearrange. Oh, how will it turn out to be?
Welcome to Podcast Lilibet. This is your podcast covering everything regarding The Crown on Netflix. We're part of the Double P Media family of podcasts. You can call me Double M.
Double M?
Yeah, that's Matt Murdock.
Oh.
And I just want to say, as a disclaimer for that song that came up at the very beginning of this podcast, I spent like hours mixing 3 different bass sounds about 36 different times. And it's a gorgeous bass sound. It will absolutely rattle your fillings if you're listening to it with AirPods. But the song didn't turn out so good. I still need to give thanks, though, to Decoy Beats and to Humi on Looperman for allowing me to use their drum and their bell loops, respectively. I really appreciate that. And as you might know, being the wonderful host that I am, you could consider me a Gordonston graduate. That's a double G, because I have, just like Philip, learned how to ask for help. Well, maybe Philip hasn't, but I have, and I need help with these podcasts, and that's why I have 2 wonderful co-hosts with me. My first co-host has a couple of nicknames. You can call her Darling, or you can call her Cabbage, but don't you ever call her Sweetie, because that name's reserved for someone else. It's Holly. She's at Hunt Pants on Twitter. Holly, welcome back.
Thank you, Matt, for having me.
Great to talk to you, Cabbage.
Cabbage. I love coleslaw.
There you go. That's why we call her Cabbage. And my other co-host, he is, of course, the founder of the Double P Media, but I'll let you in on a little secret. MI5 has been trying to pin something on him since 1992. It's Bubba. How are you?
Is this podcast about the Crown? I'm ready to go. Let's go. Who are all these new people? In the role of Bubba today, we have Brendan Fraser.
Yes.
Oh, boy. Don't forget, folks, that we are part of the Double P family of podcasts, so be sure to check them out at the word double, the letters P for podcast, HQ for headquarters on Twitter and on Instagram. You can also respond to the posts at the Facebook page. That's facebook.com/ the word double, the letters PHQ. Or you can follow me on Twitter as well at LilibetPod if you wish, LILIBetPod. You can also find these podcasts where you can find the lyrics to these songs that you can't understand if you're just hearing them audio-wise. You can find the lyrics to these songs on our videos, which are posted at the Double P Media YouTube, which sound an awful lot like our buddy Bubba's Twitter handle. If you go to youtube.com/user/fitandtrim, FITTENTRIM, you will find those podcasts, or you can just search for Double P Media on YouTube. That's enough about the podcast. Let's get right into playing some games, rating these episodes, talking about the episodes individually, talking a little bit about the music, giving you a little background of the history. That's what we do here, and hopefully you'll stick around with us as we go along. Let's rate these 5 episodes, Season 3, Episode 1 through Season 3, Episode 5. We'll be spoiling all events from that, just as a reminder. Holly, how would you rate these 5 episodes as you watched them?
I gave these episodes 8.5 out of 10 double Ds.
Double Ds?
Diplomatic drinking.
Hell yeah.
Episodes 2, 3, and Princess Alice and Anne and 4 were my highlights for these episodes for sure. I pretty quickly adjusted to the new cast, and even though I do miss the previous cast, I really felt like they do a great job of picking off where they left off and even improving upon some of those performances. It feels like a natural growth for me. We do get some repetition of themes, but I don't really anticipate those going away over the course of the future episodes either, and I think that a lot of those themes are basically what at the heart of what the show is trying to tell us about the crown.
Excellent. Bubba, how about you? How would you rate these 5 episodes?
Well, Holly just touched upon a lot of points that I'm going to get to in mine. Now, it's an interesting rating because I felt very strongly about certain episodes and disappointed with other episodes. So overall, for all 5 together, I'm going to give it 8, what I'd like to call double P's out of 10.
Double P's?
Well, double P's is when you have peaks plummeting. We had a peak plummet and create a terrible tragedy in one of these episodes, but I also thought the show started very strong. For me, the first 2 episodes were great. I thought these were the best episodes the show has ever done. I was able to transition to the new actors, and I'll talk about it more as we go in. But what was funny is that for certain of the actors, it was really like they were doing the voice of the previous actor, and that did so much to make me connect with the emotional connection I had with the character, where now it's suddenly being played by another actor. Just the fact that some of these actors' voices were able to be so similar really helped me connect with them and keep that connection. The first 2 I loved. The third I thought was good, but I thought, boy, we are kind of treading the same ground we've been on before. And then the 4th and 5th, I really started to worry that maybe this show has some limitations, and this show being The Crown on Netflix. I thought maybe it has some limitations because these beats, it feels like we've done them so many times before. Like one of the episodes, it's kind of showing us Queen Elizabeth would have been happier not being queen. And I say this, with love, I can still enjoy an episode, but it's like, guys, I got that. And then another kind of theme in, I believe, the 5th episode was the royal family is adrift in this new modern world. And once again, I feel like I've gotten that message. I understand that they have trouble with that. And it's like, okay, well, this is just another example of something I've already seen. The way I like to describe it is the documentary got the same treatment that Churchill gave that painting of himself that he didn't like. And finally, we've had a discussion, the 3 of us as hosts on this podcast, about how in the previous 2 seasons, Matt, you would always bring up, well, this didn't happen in this order. And I'd been previously arguing, I'd be like, I don't mind that the show jumbles some historical footnotes together so it can kind of tell a cohesive story, a cohesive episode. But in these final couple episodes of this first batch of season 3, I just thought, I can feel the stitching. I can feel they move stuff around, and I don't even know what the real history is. And so came in with a big high. I love those first 2, still love the 3rd, but these 4th and 5th episode I had trouble with. So I've rambled a whole lot. Matt, what is your rating?
Well, I love that you brought that up, that you don't like the 4th and 5th episode. For me, the 4th episode was one of the strongest, and I ended up, because of 2 characters in that episode, I ended up giving this 9.5, what I like to call triple A's.
Triple A's?
Yeah, Anne's and Alice's.
What?
I just love those characters. I loved Alice. I felt super emotional about her. The Aberfan episode was, of course, very moving, regardless of how you feel about the way the Queen handled that. Just feeling the situation for the people in the town, it's something that happened 50 years ago, and I felt very connected to those people and what happened to them. So some of those portrayals in just the townspeople was fantastic. I tend to judge a lot of things on emotion anyway, and those were the Aberfan and Bubbikins were the 2 episodes that I felt really strongly about. And what I feel that really carried this 5 episodes through as a whole is seeing the transformation of the Queen. We went for 2 seasons of seeing a queen who was constantly having to be told how to be queen, to a queen who has now taken control of how to be queen. It is hers. It is her stamp. And I felt that that was very much at odds with some of these other kinds of rehashing of certain types of themes. You see that they are approached very differently by this queen who has aged and become comfortable with who she is. So those were my feelings on it. We could ask what might be worst in these episodes, since we're talking about what we love or dislike about them. Why don't we go to that and we'll play our game of what's worse? Last time around, we ended up taking 4 polls because we had 4 questions regarding this game. And we started off with what's worse, being married to JFK or being married to Prince Philip? And we had 1,300 votes on the 100 Twitter. It's almost like 7 out of 13 people voted it would be worse to be married to JFK as opposed to married to Prince Philip. And the next one, what's worse, marrying someone just to please your mother, like Tony Armstrong-Jones, or marrying someone who could be your daughter, like Peter Townsend. And this is interesting. 700 votes on the 100 Twitter. 57.1% of you said marrying to please your mom would be worse. So there's a lot of dirty old men out there, evidently.
What's new?
We seem to fit the demographic. The last poll or another poll that we had was what's worse, getting made fun of behind your back, the way Jackie's comments about Elizabeth were made and they got back to her, or getting made fun of to your face, the way Macmillan was in the theater. And 1,100 votes on this one, 63.6% of you said in your face. That's almost like 7 out of 11 of you voted for in your face.
Wow.
Running in the annual challenge at Gordonston or experiencing really bad air turbulence, I thought Bubba made a super compelling argument for this one. However, out of 1,000 votes on the 100 Twitter, it's almost like 6 out of 10 of you voted for the annual challenge being worse.
Turbulence.
Too good. Let's move on to our questions for this set of 5. Holly, do you have a question for me and Bubba to argue?
Oh, God. Okay. What's worse? Losing a limerick contest or trying to dance to Coming Home?
Ooh. Bubba, are you going to argue first or me?
I'll let you go first.
All right. Well, I'm going to argue that Dancing to Coming Home is worse, simply because I played that song with the Soulard Blues Band for 20 years. And we used to have to do this little step to it as we played. And that was the most horrific thing that I ever did on stage in my entire life. So coming home, trying to dance to that song, dun, 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 dun. There's just no way you can not look like either a crazy hippie 60s person or a mannequin trying to dance to that song. Bubba, how about you? What about losing a limerick contest?
Well, there once was a podcast on The Crown where the hosts were always incredibly down. Prince Philip was a jerk, and the Queen had to do work and vote for the limerick.
Hey, wait a minute.
See how hard that is?
Close. You're so close.
We'll put it on the poll at Lilibet Pod, and it may be retweeted at the word double the letters PHQ on Twitter. Be sure to check that out and vote for it. Make Bubba a champion for his limerick, because that works. To say that losing a limerick contest is won as what's worse by doing a limerick.
Sure.
Bubba.
Yes.
What question do you have for Holly and I?
Okay, and this is for listeners too. Listeners, if you are listening, we need you to give us some feedback. If you're watching this on YouTube, give us that thumbs up, leave us some comments. We are doing this really to talk about this show we love. If you're listening to it, we assume you love The Crown as well. So please get in and tell us what's worse. Vote in these polls. We want to know from you. So my what's worse is one brought up by that 3rd episode. And so the question for you guys is, what's worse, being vice president, LBJ, or being vice queen, a.k.a. Princess Margaret?
Holly, go ahead. You go first.
I guess this depends on how you feel about being in charge. For me, I don't want to be in charge. So I think it's worse to be Vice President LBJ because he's going to eventually become president and have to clean up some messes. Whereas if I was Vice Queen Prince Margaret, I would never have to really worry about being in charge and just get to enjoy the lavish lifestyle without any of the responsibility. So being Vice President LBJ is worse.
That is an excellent argument, Holly. I wish I didn't have to tell you
that I'm wrong.
You're completely wrong, and here's why. He can, absolutely. Doesn't have to worry about being in charge because he can get there someday. Either he can sit around and wait for his president to get shot, or he can just go run for election on the coattails of a 2-term president. Either way, he's got it much easier. Being the vice queen, because you never get to be queen, is definitely worse, especially someone like Margaret, who was born for it. I mean, all of that flair. Who would have thought that she probably could have toppled the whole Soviet Union with a limerick or two that was much better than Bubba's. But that's my argument for why being her is worse.
I think we leave this to you, loyal listeners. Please go to the Twitter poll or just write us, email us if you have to. hello@doublepmedia.com. We want to hear from you.
Oh, we've got an email address? hello@doublepmedia.com. All right, cool. My turn to ask a question. I've got several here, so I'm just going to pick one out of these. Here's one regarding probably episode 5. Bubba and Holly, what's worse? Getting kicked off your job for political reasons, or only getting a really bad painting and a pathetic cake as parting gifts when you do get kicked off?
I'll go first and say that obviously, and I mean obviously, getting kicked off your job for political reasons is worse. Why is that worse? Because there's no such thing as a bad cake. Cakes are great. I mean, I am a guy who, those kind of store-bought, supermarket-bought, grocery store-bought kind of sheet cakes that have, no flavor in the cake and just way too much icing.
An essential part of my repertoire.
Those are awesome. And so obviously getting kicked off your job for political reasons has nothing to do with you getting a cake. The defense rests.
Holly?
That's really hard to argue.
Yeah.
Very hard.
I mean, the only argument I have is sometimes those cakes are not great. Like Bubba said, the cake has no flavor and the icing is just way too sweet and disgusting and gross. And look at the poor handwriting job on that cake that said farewell. It looked like a child made it, or getting a bad painting. I mean, what a way to just shame the shame you feel for not only getting kicked off for political reasons, but then having a really crappy parting gift to thank you for all of your years of service. That's worse.
I'm going to actually vote for Holly here simply because, you've already gotten kicked off your job and now you're getting a crappy cake too. That's a double C. The most important thing, though, folks, is that you vote for this. Look for the poll at Lilibet Pod, Lilibet Pod on Twitter, or you can check it out being retweeted on the word double, the letters PHQ on Twitter, or just send us a tweet saying how you feel about that particular what's worse. And we'll move on to, I think, what we can all agree is not worse, the characters. The new cast, I think we all kind of liked them. I have to admit that when we had this changeover and Peter Morgan explained that he was going to change, this was the idea from the very conception of the show, that if they made it past a season or what have you, then they were going to change the cast every 20 years of chronology because it was just too difficult to do prosthetics and all that stuff. It makes perfect sense. Mm-hmm. So I feel like that was a good choice. I was actually, it took me aback for a little bit. I was jarred, especially maybe just because I saw so many Game of Thrones alums coming into prominent roles for the whole season as well, or even beyond that. And it felt really weird to me to see Edmure as Philip, although I don't know. That might work for some people. I actually feel like Menzies looks a lot like Philip does. If you look at some of the shots that they do of him and see some pictures of Prince Philip at about that same time, he really does come across as a Prince Philip. So that didn't bother me so much. I ended up loving all of these performances, though, so I didn't have any problem with it. And you guys have mentioned that you didn't have any problem with any of these characters, really? Was there any significant character that kind of took you aback, Bubba?
Yeah, I'm going to get to one that I already mentioned that I thought because the actors were like Olivia Colman, it really felt like she was doing Claire's voice as the queen. And so that made me just really bond with these characters very well. Now, there's one actor who, even though I accepted them all very quickly, there's one actor who it just didn't work for me, and it didn't feel like, wait a minute, this isn't the same guy I was watching in the 2 previous seasons. And that was, sure enough, the new actor Charles Dance playing Uncle Dickie Mountbatten. Now, everybody who knows Charles Dance through his long career as like a henchman in For Your Eyes Only, the James Bond film from the 80s, up through his role in Game of Thrones as Tywin Lannister. When he speaks, he has a very strong, very kind of a booming voice in a bit. Well, I felt like the actor who played Dickie Mountbatten in season 1 and season 2, he was just very soft-spoken. And because his voice was softer, it gave me the impression that this character of Mountbatten, he operated through whispers. Ooh, I want my name. I want Philip's children to have the Mountbatten name. And so he wasn't kind of ever booming voiced about that. He was almost soft-spoken in the way he dealt with it. And so the fact that Dance has such that kind of booming voice, it made it hard for me to connect the two. Once again, that is a nitpick. Otherwise, I felt all the actors did very well for me. Maybe Martin Chartis is the, switching from one to the other because I recognize this new actor from a show we podcasted about, AMC's The Terror. But otherwise, once again, incredible by most of these new actors just carrying on the characters. And, maybe I thought about it for a second or two, like, that's new, or that's a new take. But I thought they were mostly all great. I've rambled for a bit. Holly, did you have any?
I agree with Bubba about Charles Dance. To me, he was just a Tywin that actually smiled from time to time, which was jarring. Watching him smile, because he never did that in Game of Thrones. But yeah, everybody else I thought was really good. I think Tobias Menzies surprised me the most, and I know he's a great actor, but I really think I really like what he's doing with Philip's character, and I think he's making Philip a little bit more likable for me this time around so far. Gasp, I know, surprise, shocker. Holly might be Team Philip, at least in these few episodes. But Helena Bonham Carter killed it. I think she was also a little bit of an improvement over
Vanessa Kirby.
Thank you. Vanessa Kirby.
All right. We're going to start with Season 3, Episode 1, Olding, written by the showrunner Peter Morgan and directed by Benjamin Caron. It's the story of the Double I.
Double I?
Institutional intrigue.
Ooh.
We start in 1964, where we get introduced to the slightly older, more stable queen through a postage stamp review of a double S.
Double S?
Settled sovereign. Those are Dean's words. Philip is concerned with Harold Wilson, who is running for prime minister, and his association with the Russians in the past. Elizabeth is concerned that Winston Churchill has had another stroke. Margaret is not accepting of good morning messages, and Taj, Tony Armstrong-Jones, is not accepting invitations to lunch at the Mirabelle. Ned Miller's From a Jack to a King plays as Tony Armstrong-Jones speeds off to photograph the election. Back at Buckingham Palace, Sir Anthony Blunt is getting some blunt treatment from Philip regarding art, and Elizabeth asks Blunt for a tutorial on art after Philip leaves. The conversation turns to Harold Wilson, where Elizabeth finds herself believing that Wilson might actually be a spy. She then goes to see Winston Churchill, who furthers her suspicions but falls asleep before she can actually thank him for all he's done for the country. Taj, again that's Tony Armstrong-Jones, returns from a day of photographs as Margaret gets drunk with friends and sings Just One of Those Things. Having won, Wilson goes to see the Queen for his first audience. And if you didn't know protocols for an audience with the Queen, now you do. The audience between Prime Minister and Queen is respectful, but full of subtle jabs from both sides. She comments at dinner that Wilson's entirely unremarkable, which actually further spawns spy suspicions. Is that a triple S? Not sure. Meanwhile, Margaret, that's definitely a double M, talks to the Queen Mother about Tony Armstrong-Jones. But a birthday celebration is interrupted as the Queen receives news of Winston's death. The strands of pearls have to come back on as a state funeral for Winston is held, where Elizabeth notices Wilson talking to a Soviet representative at some length. Meanwhile, MI5 gets a call from the U.S. Justice Department with a report of a Russian sleeper agent who has information regarding a Russian spy at the top of British establishment. Nadine gets informed that MI5 needs to brief the Queen. Now, Elizabeth suspects Wilson, but he's actually been cleared, according to MI5. It's actually the surveyor of the Queen's pictures, Sir Anthony Blunt, that they're going to be after. Blunt is giving a presentation full of metaphoric speech about truth in art before he is arrested by MI5. Blunt cuts a deal with MI5, and they suggest keeping a discovery about him a secret. Blunt is hosting an art exhibit, and more metaphors are exchanged between the Queen and Blunt publicly before she apologizes to Wilson for something he's never going to know that she's apologizing about. Meanwhile, Philip confronts Blunt privately. Philip gives the old "I've got an eye on you" speech, but Blunt counters by bringing up Stephen Ward and the Profumo scandal. Anthony Blunt goes back to his apartment at Buckingham while the Queen watches in disgust. We're told at the end that Blunt was offered complete immunity, and he continued as a surveyor of pictures until his retirement in 1972. It is also stated that the Queen never spoke of Blunt again. Bubba, what did you think of this episode?
Once again, we've talked about how it's that kind of whiplash when you suddenly see these characters played by new actors. It's a whiplash. And so the fact that I didn't have a single problem with it shows you how much I loved this episode. I also loved this new prime minister. I thought Wilson was great. We have a queen who doesn't seem to like getting in front of the camera, and she's not naturally made for giving speeches and being a celebrity, for lack of a better word. And now you've got a prime minister who similarly isn't good for the exact same things. He must be good to have gotten elected. He must have some political skills. But you watch this guy and you think he would really be more happy back in the back rows, working on policy rather than being up front and meeting the Queen. And I loved that dynamic. Growing up here in America, we learned history of the United States. Then the episode begins and everybody's like, oh, what if he's a Russian spy? And of course, I'm thinking to myself, there's no way. This is completely wrong. But I'll raise my hand and admit I did want to reach for the phone and look at Wikipedia real quick and go, was he a Russian spy? Was he a Russian asset? And so I loved this episode so much. It was a great welcome back to the crowd.
Excellent. I loved it too. One of the things that I found just really funny, Peter Morgan had told everybody that he'd planned on changing the cast, and then everybody was up in arms. Evidently, I wasn't watching the show at the time, but at the time when the changeover was happening, people were like, "Wow, how is this going to work? How are they going to have a whole new cast doing this? Is it going to be the same? Is it going to be any good? Is it going to be better? Is it going to be different? Is it going to be worse?" And I just loved the whole meta of the opening scene, where she's just saying, "No, this is me. This is how I am." And you may not like it, but I've accepted it. So should you. And so I just loved that. I thought that was fantastic. Holly, any thoughts about this episode?
Yeah, I'm going to agree with Bubba. I really like this dynamic between the Queen and Wilson. It's funny. It starts off funny with this this whole spy thing nonsense, and then they kind of get you with it wasn't him, it was this guy that's been in your house the whole time. But as the episodes go on, I really do appreciate their dynamic, and I think he's one of my favorite prime ministers so far in the show. I think he's funny, and even the beginning where he's about to meet her, and they're giving him the rundown. You don't really see them tell everybody how exactly what to do with the queen, but I like that they felt the need to tell him, all right, she's gonna do this, and then you need to do this, and they were giving him like step-by-step instructions, because I think they thought he was gonna mess it up, and I don't know, I thought that was interesting. I also liked the moment between the queen and Churchill before he dies, like their last little meeting, and she's saying all these wonderful things to him about how he was there for her, and he just falls asleep. I thought that was a precious little moment there.
Absolutely. And the other thing about that was the way she gave him a kiss on the forehead, the same way that he had given her a kiss on the forehead when he left. So I thought that was beautifully reminiscent of his last really big episode before he stepped down. So that was fantastic. Holly, I got to get your opinion on this, because I've been keeping track of the dogs, and at the end of season 2, she still had 3 dogs. At the beginning of this season, she only has 2, so we lost a dog somewhere. Yeah,
I mean, it happens.
Yeah, I was wondering if you knew that breed and you knew what their average lifespan was, actually.
It's a Pembroke Welsh Corgi.
Mm-hmm.
They can live 12 to 15 years.
So can I.
And that is the queen's favorite breed. She still has corgis to this day, and they all look just like that. They're a really cute breed. They have cute little butts. They don't have tails, but when they walk, they're their butt wiggles. It's precious. But in my line of work, I am cautious around corgis because they can be spicy and a little unpredictable. So I like them in general as dogs. I think they're great pets. Don't like them when they're at the vet quite so much because spicy.
Let's talk about the espionage for a moment. First of all, I want to put it on the poll at Lilibet Pod on Twitter. If you're a writer and you give the storyline villain Blunt here, if you just give him metaphor after metaphor after metaphor in his dialogue, are you a jerk or not a jerk? That's going to be my poll for that, because I was really, by the end of this episode, it was one of the things that put me off of this episode was his whole speech about the painting and all of that, and how it was really just about him, as if we needed to be hit over the head like that. I didn't really feel like that was necessary. So that kind of turned me off on this episode. The other thing about him, though, was, and again, here's another metaphor, but he was talking about to the queen at the beginning about how maybe Wilson's older and he's not a Russian spy anymore, which further seeded her suspicions regarding him. But I was just wondering if that was kind of a reflection of his own change of heart of the character, that he wasn't doing that as much as he used to, or if it was just he was being a really good spy and just laying down a line of BS. Anybody have an opinion on that?
The former of what you said, absolutely. I think he was trying to just feel better about himself and where he is now, maybe not being a spy anymore. Just he had to justify it for himself.
So the other big question that came up around Blunt and Philip is Philip talks about how he wants to beat Blunt up, basically, when they're alone together at the end, Bubba. And Blunt brings up the whole osteopath sketches and everything. Did this make it so that you started to doubt anything that Philip had said to Elizabeth in the season finale of season 2? I mean, does it make you think that maybe he did have more dalliances than he let her know?
No. This is one of those times where I thought, well, the show was just trying to kind of end it for us. And so I didn't really take any of that confrontation too much. Almost like the show is trying to say, well, we have to accept that history is what it is and then move forward. I didn't. Did you?
Well, the thing that I came away from it, and it's something that I keep coming across every time, and when it goes, is in regard to a younger Philip and possible romances. Morgan basically said that his aim was never to present the truth, but is to get as close to the truth as possible. So by leaving just that shed of doubt, he still leaves it up, at least as far as these characters are concerned, for you to decide whether it really happened or not for these characters. Again, historically, I don't think any of us would ever really know, but in terms of the real people. But I think that his point here at the end, kind of the last punctuation on this, so to speak, so far, is just that, there's this person's point of view, and then there's this person's point of view. Which is right? It's not up to me to decide. It's up for you to decide. That's kind of what I felt like he was trying to do.
Okay.
I'll take the opposing side. I think Blunt had the portraits, but I still think he was implying that he knew some truth for these characters. Like you said, we don't really know with the real life people what happened. But yeah, absolutely. He was involved.
Well, I was just going to say, it does carry over the continuity of the fact that Elizabeth had told him, we had to purchase these paintings back. Well, here's your guy that did it, which is the thing that I love about it all, which throws it kind of back up in your face even more.
We've talked so much about, hey, they're new actors, and I keep mentioning the voice. But another reason why I love this episode, and this might sound silly, is that at the beginning of the episode, it's almost like a game of like, okay, who is this character? Oh, they're this person. And so I had a lot of fun trying to figure out, who is this supposed to be? Oh, it's what's his name? It's Michael Adine. Okay, cool. And so that, instead of ruining my enjoyment, it actually raised it up.
Did anybody find offense to the fact that Adine rebelled against Philip's order and grew a mustache back?
Right. Why isn't he in London Tower right now being beheaded?
I liked Elizabeth's speech at the event where she's basically talking about Blunt in front of everybody and no one knows except him. And I just thought that was a nice little jab that's pretty much all she could do. She had to keep everything quiet for the sake of protecting themselves, but he knew that that was about him, and I thought that was a nice jab.
Yes. Merciless metaphors. That's what that was. A double M. Merciless metaphors.
Wow.
Moving on to another M. Let's move on to Margaretology. The episode written by Peter Morgan and directed by Benjamin Caron. Once again, it's the second episode of season 3. It's the story of a double J.
Double J?
A Jerky Johnson. Take that however you will. At Windsor Castle in 1943, Tommy Lascelles, that's Kensington 3472, is starting to get Elizabeth ready to rule, while Margaret waits in the hallway. Later, Margaret offers to take Elizabeth's place as monarch to be, but we then forward to 1965, where modern Margaret, that's a double M, is at the airfield awaiting Elizabeth to see her and Tony off on their trip to America. Elizabeth offers marital advice, which is not well received by Margaret. President Lyndon Johnson doesn't seem to like the UK not helping him in Vietnam any more than Margaret likes getting marital advice, and he refuses to help out with the economic situation brewing in the UK. Prime Minister Wilson then asks for Elizabeth's help to warm the chilly relationship between the UK and the US. She says she'll consult the 3 wise men. Meanwhile, as Billie Holiday's When You're Smiling plays, Margaret and Taj, that's Tony Armstrong-Jones, are well received in San Francisco and LA, and the Queen's 3, maybe not so wise men plan a dinner. Charteris surprises Elizabeth with news of Margaret's success, but Tony Armstrong, jealous, doesn't like playing second fiddle to Margaret. Still, as the other shoe literally drops, she promises him the spotlight for his New York book signing. President Johnson gets an invite by the 3 not-so-wise men that outbids any invite to the Kennedys, but he don't want to do no researching. So he refuses to respond. I think that's a double R. Margaret and Taj have reached Arizona, but Margaret is sick, so Taj reads the rave reviews to her about how wonderful she is. In the U.S., Johnson doesn't care if he's insulted the crown by not responding, but his chief of staff suggests inviting Margaret to the White House instead. All the while, Elizabeth sees the same rave reviews of Margaret that Taj has been telling her about. Wilson urges Elizabeth to urge Margaret to that dinner invitation, but Margaret is going to keep her word with Taj regarding New York. Elizabeth writes a letter ordering Margaret to the White House as queen and tells her why. So they go. It's up to Wilson to relate the story to Elizabeth regarding the success of the dinner in probably the most non-traditional methods ever applied. Limericks and drinking contests and Kennedy insults seem to have won the day. There was also dancing to Mark Wirt's version of Coming Home. When they return, Margaret and Taj are greeted by the Prime Minister. Margaret and Elizabeth talk, with Margaret proposing to do more on Elizabeth's behalf, just as she had done. Philip doesn't approve. He outlines his reasons. Within the family, there have always been two sides. Elizabeth is the reliable side. Kinda dull, but reliable. Margaret is engaging, but dangerous, like some other members of the royal family proceeding. Margaret can read how Elizabeth is going to respond to her proposal, and we go back to 1943 where Margaret gets a double L.
Double L?
That's a lasso's lashing. Regarding her wanting to be queen. Back in 1943, young Margaret is upset as young Elizabeth watches. And then we get a Margaret mirror montage, that's definitely a triple M, as older Margaret feels the same rejection as her younger self back in 1943 once did. Holly, what do you got for me on this episode?
The limerick scene, or the whole scene with Wilson describing the events of that night of Margaret and LBJ together, and I just like how they kind of edited that scene, and it was super fun. It's one of my favorite moments. It's really just light and hilarious. So it's one of my favorite moments of the whole entire series.
Holly, can I follow up on that? Can I follow up on that, Holly? Because watching that scene, what it really said to me, or reminded me of, is that Olivia Colman has a background in comedy, and her frozen expression as Wilson was explaining what her sister and President Johnson did was comedy gold, and she was incredible. I thought she did a great job.
I love that line. Well, you've gotten this far, you know.
Yeah,
it was perfect. And the guy that plays Wilson, he was fantastic too. The way he was felt so awkward during that moment. I loved it.
Oh no, there's no fallout. Like, that was just perfect. I loved that whole scene. And yeah, you're right, Bubba. She was a great straight man in this episode, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to give a technical shout out real quick, Bubba, before I get to any other points of yours. But the costumes that we never really talk about because I don't know anything about them, mainly. But if you look at pictures, some color photographs of some events from Margaret visiting the U.S., and these costumes are just impeccable direct duplicates of what you see in these pictures. You see them on the screen here, and I just think that is amazing. And that's one of the reasons why I get so frustrated by the fact that the show plays with events in time so much, is it's like they take such care to reproduce these moments, to reproduce these costumes, to reproduce cars, the look of buildings, everything. And then you get the fact that, well, we'll just take something and skip it ahead 5 years so that we can make it play into this storyline. That's something that's kind of frustrating for me. Bubba, what do you got?
The big thing I thought about this episode is that I had such dread in season 2 of Princess Margaret marrying this guy, who I was just like, oh, I don't like this guy at all. And the fact that they were able to still have problems, but I thought worked relatively well considering, I was impressed by it. I was like, oh, okay. So this is actually, for whatever reason, somehow it's impressive that she's able to get her husband, who she has a lot of trouble with, in you know, okay, I've been crazy, I've been out drinking, been out partying, but I am going to support him when he goes to his book. And so I thought at times they made a great team. And so the fact that I had been against Princess Margaret marrying this creepy photographer for so long, you know, I was like, oh, don't do it. But seeing them when they were working well in this episode, I loved it. I thought it was great.
Yeah, you see that one moment of him being very frustrated that she's not
Right.
paying any attention to him and everything like that. And they have a big blow up about that. But the other parts of the episode with Tony, he's reading the reviews to her about how great she is and everything.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's being very supportive of her. And in turn, I agree, she's being supportive of him. I'm not sure if that book signing ever happened or not, simply for the fact that they ended up having to go to Washington because she got the Queen, basically ordered her to go to Washington instead. If you look at real history, after that meeting with Johnson, they left the next day. So I don't know. I don't know if a book signing was happening before then, and they then went to the White House or what. But regardless of that, I did love that. But it brings up the end of the episode with Philip and Elizabeth talking about whether Margaret should do more. And Susan had brought this up before regarding the mention of Eddie in that scene between Philip and Elizabeth. That's the Albert Victor that Susan had mentioned in a feedback a long time ago. And so the question becomes, are the Windsors like the Targaryens? Are there two sides of the coin? Do you have a Elizabeth who is practical and dutiful and all of this stuff? And on the other side, maybe not to the extreme of a Targaryen, but you have parts of the Windsor family that have a wild side. Is it any different than any other family just because of the differentiation of roles and the culture of the family and what have you in that respect? Or do you really see that there's a problem with this family in the way that there could be split ups in terms of extreme personality changes or differences between different members of the family?
Oh man, you've opened a can of worms there, Matt. And so obviously, I think it's just natural that I'll use my own family as an example. When you have certain siblings who kind of love to talk and love to be center of attention, they are naturally, who are they taking that attention away from? They're taking that away from the other sibling who, is either going to fight for that attention or is fine receding and not being the showboat, not being the talker. And I think they're so similar. I honestly feel Margaret and Elizabeth are, but the show focuses on the extreme. The show focuses on what makes them different. I am going to imagine that sooner or later we're going to get to an episode where the show focuses on what makes them similar, what makes them sisters, because it feels like we focused on their differences an awful lot.
That's an excellent point. Holly, do you have any thoughts about this? You look at David versus George, this Prince Albert Victor versus the person who ended up becoming George V. Yeah.
The parallels are all there, and it just makes you wonder if even Tony agrees with Margaret that by calling her, she's the number one, even though that she was born the number two. And I wonder if Margaret would have gone a similar way as David had she actually become, the crown. Would she have been able to temper her wild side enough to be able to take responsibility, or would she have had to fight a lot to be herself and also rule in the way that David did and have to make a choice ultimately? So I don't know. What if she was born first and she still wanted to marry Peter Townsend? How would that have looked if she was the queen? And how hard would she have fought? Would she have cared? Would she? Maybe not. I don't know. It's kind of hard to say. The situation could have been a lot different, but I think there definitely are parallels you can draw between her and David for sure, just because of their personality-wise, and that's just within 2 generations of each other.
So why is it that I like Margaret so much better than I do David?
Because she's not a Nazi?
Well,
That's a double end.
What I would say, Matt, is that because of Margaret's position, there's almost nothing she can do that will really hurt the crown in any way, right? That will really blow back on her family in any way. Where because of David's position, it did blow back on the family and it did blow back on the crown. And so, yes, we know, let's not get into his Nazism, or you can if you want to. But even if you taking that aside, I think one thing you would say is that David had the choice. David had the choice, hey, be king or not. Margaret never had that choice. So it's easier to just accept, oh, hey, she's doing what she wants to do.
True.
Good point. Anything else about this particular episode?
A couple of small things. Margaret getting woken up by a phone call from the Queen is one of my, and she's usually hungover. It's one of my favorite running jokes of the series. I feel like it happens a lot, going back to all seasons. It's just funny. It's like, here we go again. And then last week I was complaining about that scene, you mentioned it earlier, with Tommy and the conversation they had when they were drunk. And I was like, man, we really missed out on that scene. And then we get like a little teaser because Philip tells us a little bit about what happened. He's like, oh, remember that? He's like, remember that time I told you about how I got drunk with Tommy? And I was like, yes, tell me more. And then it was a serious conversation. It didn't sound nearly as fun as I thought it would have been when we were talking about it last week. So...
Good point.
Does anybody want to defend our President Johnson? I'll take that silence for my answer.
Well, yeah. We ready to move on to Aberfan, folks?
Let's do it.
Yeah, let's roll down the hill.
All right. Oh. Season 3, Episode 3, Aberfan, written by Peter Morgan. I can't stop laughing. And directed by Benjamin Caron. Obviously, this is a very sad episode, even though I don't sound like I'm introducing a very sad episode. On October 20th, 1965, school children are sent home from a school in Aberfan, Wales, to practice a hymn that they will sing the next day before breaking classes. Elizabeth writes in a diary, the next day, Tip 7 of the mining operation perched above the village of Aberfan collapses, and the avalanche destroys part of the town, nearly completely destroying the school that those children were getting ready to sing in. The Prime Minister is made aware during a public appearance as rescue efforts try their best to save who they can in the village. Charteris comes to the Queen and Adine with the news and a quick draft of a statement to be sent out regarding the tragedy. Once approved, he also suggests that the Queen visits the scene, but she and Adine reject the idea. As the Prime Minister is briefed on his way to the scene, he realizes this might be a political opportunity. The rescue site is grim. So is the press conference as questions are asked about the tips and where they were located in regards to a spring. Tony Armstrong-Jones gets the news of the tragedy and leaves for Wales to go photograph, with Margaret just being made aware. The next day, the Prime Minister urges the Queen to visit Aberfan. The next day, she is with Margaret and the Queen Mother, and Margaret wants to day drink because of the story that Tony Armstrong-Jones has relayed about the village. The next day, townsfolk are angry, and Marcia recognizes the politics that is happening and urges Wilson to take action to help the party if need be, including blaming the Queen for not going to Aberfan. 6 days after the disaster, Philip comes to the scene. He attends a horrific mass funeral. He reports back to Elizabeth about the tragedy and the hymn used and how powerful those moments were. The next day, a newspaper editor passes on word to Charteris and Adine that the government will focus the shift of blame on the Queen. They decide that they must go to Aberfan. Charteris briefs her on what they will do and the emotion that is expected of her. She goes and sees everything. She meets families while the press watches. On the way home, she asks for a recording of a hymn that was sung at the funeral that Phil had talked about, and she summons Wilson. She chews him out for blindsiding her in regards to the blame, but finds out that it was actually people under him that had done so. She confesses to him regarding her feigned emotion during the Aberfan visit, and her incapacity for emotion in general. He admits to her that he is nothing like the people that he represents. Through the course of it, they find a mutual understanding of each other. She then plays a recording of the hymn, and a tear comes to her eye. We're told at the end of the episode that 144 people were killed at Aberfan, 116 of those being children, and that according to those close to her, the Queen's delayed response to Aberfan remains her biggest regret as sovereign, and that she has returned to visit more than any other member of the royal family. Holly's got lots to say about this episode. Go for it.
Okay, this episode, it was very emotional, and it hit home for me in many ways. I'm from South Louisiana, lived here my entire life, so I've lived through a lot of hurricanes, and I've seen how a lot of these situations, emergency situations, are handled. I'm reminded of how past presidents have handled devastating hurricanes and the government's responses at all levels, and I was really disappointed in the Queen in this episode and how she just came off so cold. I will grant her 1 point. She said the very last thing emergency rescue services need when working against the clock is the Queen coming. Yes, she is absolutely right. But everything, all of her responses to like her visiting is like, why would I go? And like she just didn't even sounded like she cared even a little, and I had a big problem with that. So on the one hand, you know, her not going, I'm reminded of Trump after Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico, and he just goes down there and he's like throwing paper towels after his press conference, like really not helpful at all. And I mean, a lot of the efforts they had down there, they didn't really get a lot of help from the U.S. It's really sad and devastating, and he made just a joke of it. So, you know, this is where I agree with her. Like, yes, don't go and do something like that during a time of crisis. And then I don't know if anybody, listeners or you two guys, have ever been anywhere when the president's around, like either in traffic or at an airport. Like you can't go anywhere. Like everything just stops. It's really inconvenient on a regular day. Imagine when it's like there's a crisis and you need supplies and stuff to like get places, and then the president comes and everything just has to stop. It's awful. So I agree with her there. But I also think about Hurricane Katrina and how slow the government was to respond at all levels. It was absolutely horrific, and especially like in this situation, the loss of life was preventable if proper measures had been taken, you know, days before. Like in this episode, if they would have been following the right regulations, this may not have happened and loss of life wouldn't have occurred. But what we do see on the screen in these disasters happen is what it looks like for me. It's the community helping themselves. No one is waiting for the government to like step in and do the jobs, but they do require help, like the supplies that need to come in. And I think that's the government's role to play in these cases. And not that they didn't get that. They were absolutely getting that in this episode. But just her response was like just gross and devastating to me. And it really made me think a lot less of her after watching this episode. She was just so cold, zero compassion. She says, "Why would I go?" And her tone suggested that she like didn't care at all. And when Wilson counters with to comfort people, her response is to put on a show. And I'm like, no. And I know I just brought up this Trump example, but I don't think that her going and showing support and care is putting on a show. I think that's just compassion and caring about the people in your country. And it's, like I said, it's the first time I really despised her. It just felt so insensitive. And then you contrast that with like Tony and Philip going and seeing their heartbreaking reactions, like they were legitimately hurt, and it just left a really bad taste in my mouth. How do you not care that children died? It's awful. And then her later admitting that she felt nothing was unsurprising, but it's not something you don't just do nothing about. This isn't one of those times where you just don't do anything. It's terrible. And by the time she ends up going, some of the stuff she did was very performative. The like wiping of the tears when she steps out, it felt so fake. And then by the time she's actually tearing up by the end, listening to the hymn, I don't even care that she found a modicum of emotion. Finally, I'm done with her. So she could have faked it better, is really my opinion. And I'm sorry for that emotional rant, but it was awful.
No, I can see that this is deeply personal for you, Holly, and I completely understand that. So her explanation of even when she was a child, visiting the hospitals with her parents, and she couldn't be upset. None of that was upset by her at all. Do you think that points? And it's not the case for the real Queen. The real Queen actually has been seen to cry, and it wasn't, some kind of show like she's doing there. But when she said put on a show, I thought she was merely talking about the fact that she was just not capable of it, which seems inhuman. But, emotional numbness is an actual medical condition that can be caused by post-traumatic stress disorder and those kind of things. And she was a pretty impressionable kid when World War I or World War II started. So I just kind of chalked it up to that. But I can see...
That's a good point.
But the thing that I can see, especially as someone who's been through, a natural disaster like you have, how that would really put you off. I can totally get that.
Well,
Bubba, what do you...
Sorry, let me just counter one thing. I think I would have felt better about it if we hadn't seen her get emotional over JFK's assassination, or, there's so many other things we've seen her actually get emotional about, and I just found it really surprising that this was not one of them.
Okay, so that's fair.
I don't know.
Bubba, how about you?
Holly, I wanted to say thank you for saying that. I think it's good. I'm sure our listeners know that, this is a variety of opinions, and we're just sharing ours. We want to hear your opinions as well. Once again, at Lilibet Pod on Twitter, we want to hear from you. I can't stress it enough. I want to say that I am the age I am. I have grown up in a world where when a disaster hits, and sadly we all know in this country, in our world, too many disasters that have hit. And it is, kind of part of the process that leaders will go. And so because I wasn't alive back then when these events were happening, I would wonder if that wasn't the case back then, and if the Queen, who is such a prisoner at times of decorum and etiquette and what's been done before, I wouldn't be surprised if that was just her, okay, we don't do it before, that's our MO, we don't go. And so as someone from modern times, I could tell it was wrong. I thought it was comical. Once again, Martin Charteris is the first one to say, hey, you may want to go to this. But I want to jump to there were so many things about this episode that just fascinated me. And one of the things where I couldn't tell if the show was trying to put its thumb on the scale or not was back to my favorite new character, Wilson, where one of his allies there are saying, listen, you got to, this is political. You've got to point out that we just got here, we just got in charge. You've got to defend our policies when these people are going to try to make political hay from this disaster. And the fact that he didn't, and I have to be honest, I got a bit upset with him. Like, hey, if you really, weren't responsible and you believe your policies set up things that will prevent this in the future or help, you've got to defend him. And so I got a bit frustrated with Wilson then too. But that was just one of the moments in this fascinating episode that I really thought about a lot.
I guess in my eyes, I was thinking he was like one of the first ones on the scene, and I was happy to see that. And then when the road was blocked and he said, then we'll walk, like he was determined to get there. So it's not really to Bubba's point at all, but... No,
I think that is a great point.
Yeah.
Right. Maybe this isn't correct, but a part of me also thought about, I wouldn't have minded if Wilson got there and they're just digging. If, hey, give me a shovel, and he starts digging, and you think, wait a minute, you're a leader. There's more important things, there are ways you can help being a leader more than shoveling. But at times I just want to, I want people to just dive in and, okay, I'm here. Everybody shovel and let me shovel. So
and to me, that would not have been performative. I felt like he would have been digging to like actually try to help.
Yeah.
And I didn't even mention when Philip comes back and she asks him if he wept, and I'm like, what kind of question is that? Like, was she worried about him looking vulnerable in front of the countrymen? Like, that bothered me too. Just why? I don't know. Sorry, this is an upsetting episode for me. And this is why this is the episode that like stuck. When I thought of season 3, this was really the only episode I could remember, and it's not until I started writing down notes for the podcast that I was like, oh, this is why, because this hurts, and I forgot how much it hurts. I think I kind of blocked a lot of this stuff out.
What did you guys think of the effects? I mean, this sounds silly, but we were just talking about the costumes being so incredible and so detailed, and what a big production this is. I thought it was a pretty good effect of a disaster that sadly happened. I apologize if we made light of it. We're really making fun of the show version, not obviously the real tragedy. But what did you guys think of the effects? I thought it was pretty good.
I thought so too. I thought they did a good job. I was terrified in the moment for those children. So Yeah.
I found that school scene and the way that they set it up with the day before and everything like that, if it didn't have emotional impact, that was horrifying. That was just absolutely horrifying.
Okay, on a lighter note, the most unbelievable thing about this episode was how at the very, going back to the very beginning, and the kid's assignment was to memorize that song, and every kid they showed was singing the song in their house, actually doing the homework, and I was like, really? This is real life? I don't know. That's a silly thing. Sorry, that's not that
something
funny.
else to point out for people who have been paying attention throughout the show and know their history a little bit. Remember that this Aberfan is in Wales, and there is always, no matter how far you look back in history, there has always been contention between the Welsh and the Crown, or just the UK in general. And some of that really hit home with me. I have a really good friend that I met years ago. I actually first met him online, and then a couple of times while I was touring in Europe, I actually got a chance to meet him. He's an artist, and he lives in Wales, not too far from Cardiff. And the whole thing about the Crown is still a big point of contention. Now, he won't bring up Aberfan or anything. He's my age. He wouldn't have known. But it's still, there's just a general ill feeling from what I can tell, as far as most Welsh people really individualizing themselves apart from the UK. Maybe not to the extreme of an Ireland in that respect, but definitely the sentiments are there. And so this really hit that kind of inner conflict home for me as well.
Really great episode. And as I said at the beginning, I thought this season began so strong.
Always good to end on a up note. That is for sure. So we're glad that you came through with that one. Let's talk about Greece and the person that came from there. It's Alice, Princess Alice. This is a potential story of a triple R.
Triple R?
A royal roof repairing. Yes, that's what I need, the groans. It's Season 3, Episode 4, Bubbikins, written by the showrunner Peter Morgan, directed by, once again, Benjamin Caron. We see Philip's mother, Princess Alice, struggling with the financial troubles of her convent in Athens in 1967. We next go to a Meet the Press interview where Philip tells the world that he has to sell a yacht because the Queen hasn't gotten a pay raise in 15 years. A reporter for The Guardian, John Armstrong, is watching the interview and calls his editor to reserve space for a story. Wilson informs the Queen about sentiments in the cabinet to get rid of the monarchy costs altogether. She tells Philip, and he says, "Leave it with me." Meanwhile, Alice heads down to the pawn shop to hawk some old crown jewels. Instead, she gets the police called on her. The police have to tell the pawn shop owner that Alice is the real deal. Princess Anne comes to see Philip at his beck and sweetie call. He asks Anne to be part of the documentary film being made of the royal family. Then Philip pitches the documentary to everybody else. The BBC comes in to start filming. Wilson's audience with the Queen acknowledges the documentary, but also brings news of a coup in Greece. Elizabeth wants to save Alice right away. Philip worries she'll jeopardize the documentary. The Queen overrules Philip. Charteris goes and brings Alice to England, heartbroken to leave her convent. The Queen and Princess Anne welcome Alice, though she looks for Philip, who is busy with filming things. Philip is told of Alice arriving as she gets her new home settled. He recalls being taken away and doesn't go to see her. The family is being, quote, documented watching TV with full commentary by Margaret. Alice is looking for a light and she gets one from a BBC guy. They try to interview her, but Philip stops it. Elizabeth and Philip argue about Princess Alice. Elizabeth goes to see Alice and finds that her and Anne are bonding. The plight of Alice's convent is brought up, but Elizabeth's suggestion of talking to Philip is not well understood. Reporter John Armstrong is working again as we see the royal family watch their documentary, as do the heir and the spare, and Prime Minister Wilson. John Armstrong writes a scathing article about the documentary. Elizabeth is not happy with the article, but Wilson tries to reassure her. They discuss what the monarchy actually is. Next, Philip gets an I told you so regarding the documentary from Anne. Philip asks her to do an interview with Armstrong to try and salvage the situation. The invitation is sent out to Armstrong, but he gets baited and switched by Anne to instead interview Princess Alice. Alice tells her story to Armstrong. The article comes out, and after Philip reads it, he goes to see Alice, reads what is essentially a love letter article, and apologizes to his mother. They talk about the past and the double F.
Double F.
Philip's faith. I'm saying that's a double F. No? Adine asks the Queen about getting other countries to air the documentary, and she says, "No way, Jose." She tells him that no one is to ever see it again. She then looks out the window to see Philip and his mother, Princess Alice, walking together in an effort to make up for time lost.
Just once again, kind of like back in season 2 with the Lord Altrincham episode, the royals are trying so hard to be this perfect specimen, feel like being for everybody, and this perfect example. So when they try something and it blows up in their face, until somebody else comes along and humbles them and humanizes them and wins the love of the people back over. And in this case, it's Princess Alice. It was a little infuriating. I was like starting to be on Phil's side, and then he's like ignoring his mom and doesn't want her there, even though there's a coup in Greece and they literally saved her, and he's like, "I'll see her later. We got cameras around." And Anne is so smart to like manipulate that situation where the press has to talk to her, and then she gets to tell her story, and it went, and they win. It's a love letter, he says. They write a love letter, and it's just, I don't know why they have to keep learning this lesson over and over again. You know, I get it. They need to feel separate, or what's the point of them? But I feel like if the more times they show that they're human, like it's always better for them when they do. And I love this episode. I loved Alice and I love Anne. These two are the stars of the show for me now. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it was good stuff. And Alice is funny. She's just funny. I love her.
Oh my gosh, she's so great. Bubba, what were your feelings about Philip and Holly brought up Philip and Alice's relationship? How did you feel about that?
Once again, this will sound terrible, but even though these are extreme examples, you recognize certain things from your own family. And there are mothers and sons who fight. There are, family members who you're like, oh, geez, I don't want to talk to them. And so I honestly thought it was fine. I thought it was fun. I thought this was the episode where I started to once again feel like things were being put together to make sense, but also that it's like this documentary, I mentioned it at the top, this documentary feels just like Winston Churchill's portrait, just like so many things where the royal family doesn't know exactly how to deal with their new status, their real kind of role now in this society that doesn't need royals, let's be completely honest. And so it just felt like treading over similar ground. So while I did love Alice, at a certain point, I could see where the episode was going. So it also lost the unpredictability that a good episode should have. And I was just kind of waiting for that turn, for the two storylines to come together. Like in my own head, I probably thought they didn't really go together too well. And so I was just sitting waiting, okay, how are they going to combine? Oh, well, obviously they'll combine because this person that everybody is kind of looking down on is naturally going to rise up. That's how stories work. And so I thought it was fun. Yeah. That's all I'll say. Now, you loved it, though. So, Matt, take me to task.
Okay, well, I'm not going to take you to task because, I think you make some valid points. But I will say this. First of all, that Guardian reporter and the article he wrote about Alice, that's a complete fact. Like you said, Bubba, it was made to make a story. Philip's Meet the Press interview occurred 2 years after the documentary was filmed, basically. And so, again, they're just piecing different things in order to try and tell a Philip story. But, Holly, where I'm going to disagree with you is I actually started to feel more sympathy for Philip. I know that I come to Philip's defense a lot, but I actually started to feel more sympathy towards why he was avoiding her through that flashback that he had of her being separated from him. That was a very traumatic moment for him. And so when you're a person who it gets traumatized by something like that, you tend to try to avoid it, which is not, not the greatest thing in the world. He should have gone to somebody and asked for help to try and fix some of those issues. But I felt that was the core as to why he was avoiding her. And the fact that he was, when he realized what good she had done for him through this fictional interview, he was the first person to go to her and say, "This is unbelievable what you did. I feel so terrible for the way that I've been." I felt that was very endearing to me in a lot of ways. And Alice, to me, is just, like you said, she is amazing. My heart broke so hard for her in that plane when she was leaving. That got me. What can I say? I'm just I'm a sack of tears. I can't not feel that emotion. Just an incredible performance.
Man, Matt, I wish you were here so I could pass you a tissue right now. I'm really sorry.
Yeah, I need it. I need a tissue. I really do.
Well, while Matt, share those emotions. That's what we're giving our honest takes, and hopefully, listeners, you love these honest takes, even if they get us emotional. Once again, write to us, interact with us. We're begging here. We want to hear that you're enjoying this great show with us. I'll go ahead and tell just a brief side tangent of my story. So my grandmother ran some furniture stores, and because she sold a bunch of mattresses, the mattress company would always give her these trips. And so she decided to take 2 of her grandchildren on trips every year, like once you got to a certain age. So she took me and a cousin of mine to Greece. So it was my grandmother, my cousin Mather, and I in Greece. And Athens and the Acropolis, everybody knows. You think, oh my goodness. But I didn't realize it was this relatively recently after this coup. And I thought Athens, well, boy, this city's run down. This city's dirty. This city's beat up. And so I was much more taken by the Greek Isles because we did a cruise and we saw all of them. But knowing, when you're a stupid kid, like I was a stupid kid in the early 80s, you don't realize, oh, wait a minute. You're in a place that literally had a coup. I'm trying to do the math, I guess 15 years before. So it was incredible. The Greek people were very nice, but Athens at that point was really, really rough looking, even around the Acropolis. So.
Now, I was just going to change topics slightly. We get some Princess Anne and Philip scenes where we get to see their relationship and how very similar they are. I think Anne is definitely takes after Philip a lot more than, well, obviously, than Charles does. But she has a lot of his wit and his sass. I think you referred to her sass as someone else's sass, but I think it's just Philip's sass that she has.
Okay.
So, yeah. But this is kind of the start of what we get to see of their relationship. Sorry, spoiler alert. But I really like their relationship together, and I like how they play off each other. You can see a lot of the love there and their similarities and how much he sees himself in her.
Now, do you think? And I'll bring it up again. We were kind of talking about this with Margaret because this is a very loving portrait, of Anne. And from what I've known kind of my whole life, the British people, have loved Anne for a long time. But do you think because she has the freedom of, hey, I'll never be in line, like she is literally getting the life that her mother could never get because her mother was, going to be the sovereign, was going to wear the crown. And or is it just that even if she had been, quote unquote, next in line for the crown, she got so much of her father's influence that she developed this very take charge, very independent personality. And maybe the show doesn't even answer this, I should say, based on these 5 episodes, but it was one I was wondering.
Well, and it's interesting as you look up to the lead up to the introduction of a more adult Anne, just the fact that she is so much closer to Philip. If you remember back at the beginning of season 2, how I guess it was Philip and his friend Mike Parker were talking about the way that the Queen treats Charles because he is the thing.
Right.
And because of that, Philip probably has also, because Charles is the thing. You have the Gordonston episode. You have episode 9. in that season, and you see all of the rifts there. But even further back, you see how the struggles that Charles was having with fishing and things like that when Margaret was still trying to marry Peter Townsend. And obviously, the relationship between Anne and Philip was much closer than Philip and maybe even Elizabeth at times. And you see it in things like at the beginning of the episode, at the end of the episode of episode 9 of season 2, where, Anne comes running into his arms and he picks her up and things like that. So I can only imagine that her personality was much more influenced by Philip than Charles's ever was, who seems like, because he is the thing, he has to be treated differently, which, God, awful.
She's kind of an inverse of Margaret too. Like, she doesn't seem to have the desire, but I think she could do the job if she had to, if she was put in the position, if a situation was created where she needed to. I think she is capable, but I don't think she neither wants or desires it either. And when now thinking about our conversation earlier about David/Edward and Margaret and how different Anne is just from those two, I don't know, it's really interesting to think about.
How do you think Anne would have done at Gordonston?
Well, she'd have totally kicked butt.
She would have. She would have killed all those kids.
I mean, my goodness. She'd have been the first over the wall. She'd have been the first to finish the challenge. This girl can do anything.
If she had that window bed, she would have just kicked the sheets off and just let the rain fall directly onto her body and be cold and not complain.
No, she would have changed the direction of the wind and the rain.
Speaking of trying to change directions, are we ready to talk about Coup?
Let's go.
All right, season 3, episode 5. I'm great at the segues this week, aren't I? Coup is written by Peter Morgan and directed by Christian. Here's a name I'm going to butcher. Shaukow. It's directed by Christian, and it's a case of a double T.
Oh, a Tywin takeover? Yeah, it is. You said I didn't read the notes, Matt. In your face.
We start off the episode with everyone greeting the Double M.
Double M?
Yeah, that's media mogul Cecil King, as he writes a damning headline about Wilson. The cabinet proposes going after Uncle Louis Mountbatten, i.e. Tywin Lannister, as a scapegoat for spending. Mountbatten gets called to the office and Wilson does the Trump thing, you're fired. And Mr. King is outraged of the firing, but he actually wants to hire Mountbatten instead. Now, as Mountbatten leaves his office, he knows that there's more than one verse to Auld Lang Syne. Did you? For his years of service, Tywin gets to keep a painting and a farewell cake. I guess that's better than getting crossbowed by your son. So he goes home and takes a bath. The Queen gets counsel from Pycelle regarding her horse. Her Porchy, Tywin, and the Queen Mother are disappointed when the horse Apprentice loses the Queen Alexandra Stakes. Wilson next informs her that they must devalue the pound. Ooh. But she tells him that she's going to be away doing horsey stuff with Porchy. As Wilson must tell the nation what's going on, she flies in search of good horse training methods. Media mogul King, that's a double M with a K, and colleagues come to see Tywin recite a stirring poem, then invite him to the Bank of England. The Queen and Porchy make plans to overhaul their horse system and to go to the US for a couple of days. The Bank of England group proposes to Mountbatten that they want to seize power away from Wilson and put Tywin in place of Wilson. Mountbatten tries to dismiss himself from the idea, but technicalities are presented which make him suggest a meeting again in 2 days. Elizabeth researches the American horse breeding while Tywin researches coups. The meeting at Mountbatten's place plans for all contingencies of a coup, with the one wild card being the Queen herself, who is getting dragged all over the US by Porchy, who she now has offered a job to. The Queen is trying to tell Porchy something, maybe it's Torchy, but Uncle Dickie calls. She tries to tell him again, but this time the Prime Minister calls, telling her about the coup plot and the people behind it. No more horsey, Porchy, we're going home. This time, Tywin gets called to the principal's office. He gets several lashes with a switch, verbally, before being sent to put his nose in a corner. That corner happens to be Alice's room. Him and Alice talk about what's happening, getting old, and their roles from here on out. Philip finally appears at the end of the episode. Him and Elizabeth talk about Porchy and Tywin, and then the episode ends with some double F.
Double F.
Philip flirting. Come on. Just one catfish joke? Let's talk about this. The most important question of this episode has to be, was Elizabeth trying to tell Porchy something other than, that she was making plans for horses when they were at the dinner when Mountbatten and the Prime Minister calls? I mean, was I supposed to think that she was going to say something else to Porchy? She kept trying to say something and the phone calls kept interrupting. And boy, that did not work for me at all. Did it work for anybody?
You mean, like, when she was implying that she would have wanted something like a relationship with him, and that was part of something that she was missing in her life?
Yeah, like she like.
Is that what you're implying, Matt? That's what she wanted to say?
Well, I don't know what she wanted to say. I'm hoping that that's not it. That's the conclusion I came to, and I didn't like it.
Didn't, Matt. I thought the show was doing a fake out.
I think maybe they were implying that Porchy was waiting for her to say something along those lines, but she was never going to.
Gotcha. That answers that question. What else you got?
Well, I mentioned that I was tough on these second couple of episodes of the 5 we're reviewing this week. And once again, I've only seen these first 5 of season 3. I've not seen the back half of season 3. But this felt like we have done this before. We have done this so many times before. The Queen Elizabeth character on the show would be happy doing something else. She would like a sliding doors, quirk where she could go through and see her life, where she didn't have to wear this heavy crown. Then the coup attempt, this was one I didn't need to look up in Wikipedia. I'm like, they did not throw out the elected prime minister. Well, I guess, the elected party that won in their prime minister choice. It just felt contrived of an episode. And so even though this is a great show, and even in a contrived episode, there are things you can like about it. To me, what I really wanted here, let me get right to it. I felt in these first 5 episodes, at times the Queen, Elizabeth, is a supporting character to somebody else in a show which I kind of think should be about her. I don't know if she had any great shining moments. Like, I really think we saw more of Lord Mountbatten in this episode than we did the Queen. And when we did see the Queen, it felt so, I hate to say horse racing's frivolous, but that isn't the important stuff, right? Obviously, the coup attempt is more important. So I was just tough on this episode. I apologize.
Yeah, I understand that. And the fact that the older cast Porchy looked younger than the younger Porchy didn't help me either. But that was just a nitpick of mine. The other thing that I just wanted to say, though, and one of the things that did, or a couple of the things that did endure me to this episode that maybe didn't you, was the fact that at the end, Philip asks about Porchy, and then he's cool with it. He would have never been cool with it in season 1, So that's one thing that I really loved. I love that ending, and again, the new Queen, that music. We'll be talking about that in the music section, but I just love that theme. And I just thought that Philip and Elizabeth were so cute when they were flirting there at the desk at the end. I loved everything with Alice. Alice is just, she stole these couple of episodes for me. I just absolutely loved her in these 2 episodes. Holly, what do you think?
I'm kind of with you, Matt. Like, the ending parts of this episode were the best parts of this episode, and I'm with you too, Bubba. It just wasn't. We've been here, done this before, and it just wasn't super interesting. And again, tired of hearing about how Liz would rather be doing something else besides being queen. And yeah, I think my favorite scene was Mountbatten and his sister, and them just kind of like laughing together about aging and becoming a spectator instead of being a part of it. And then Alice laughs at him for getting dressed down by the Queen, which is just cute.
Yeah, that was a cute moment when brother and sister reunited. I
Yeah,
like that.
Princess Alice of nowhere at all. I thought that was just super sweet. And I love that Alice literally humbles everyone in the family. And in this scene, she gets to do it with Mountbatten and with her brother. Matt, as far as the Philip stuff, I'm kind of with you on the cuteness of the flirting, but it was, I don't know, I was kind of on edge. I was like, okay, Philip's getting jealous again. He's insecure. But then he seemed to, in that moment, even overcome his insecurity and, like, give her that kiss. And then, like, they were both just, like, cute and excited. And then she was going to come up in a minute. So, you know, like, good for both of them, I guess. So, I don't know. That was, like, the best stuff for me. The rest of it just felt like a lot. I liked watching Tywin and Lord Royce go toe-to-toe together. That was fun for Game of Thrones purposes, but other than that, I was just kind of whatever on this episode.
Understood. I will say this, that Cecil Boyd Rockford chose poorly when it came to deciding whether the horse was ready or not.
Yeah.
See, I love Julian Glover. He was so good in that role in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade.
I also missed him in this episode. That was Julian Glover, so don't feel alone. Bubba, it was me too.
Treason is treason!
Yep.
Glue is glue. And that's what we make out of the horses that lose.
Oh, no.
Oh, you had such a good thing running there, and you had to say that.
I'm sorry.
You brought me both so much joy with that voice and then such sadness with the content of your words.
Hey, now.
Hey, let's look at some of the history of the events that are depicted in this episode. In 1964, in Season 3, Episode 1, Olding, Sir Anthony Blunt was offered a secret immunity deal in exchange for a confession regarding his involvement in the Cambridge Soviet spy ring.
Mm.
So that's why he was able to stay, and why MI5 wanted him to just stay out of sight. And all of that stuff at the end of the episode where, she never spoke to him again. That's what's in the episode. I don't have any idea. I can't imagine that anything they would say would be nice to each other. In that same episode, Michael Straight was the person who showed up in D.C. and turned Blunt in. From 1964 until 1974, he continued to go back to the FBI in regards to, with information regarding that Cambridge spy ring. Mm. Same episode, Harold Wilson, our new favorite prime minister, was elected on October 15th, 1964. Same episode, of course, Winston Churchill. He suffered his last stroke actually on January 15th of 1965. He died at the age of 90 on January 24th, 1965, and his body laid in state from January 26th to 29th with a funeral at St. Paul's Cathedral on January 30th in 1965. On to the next episode, Season 3, Episode 2, Margaretology. The visit that Margaret and Tony did occur between November 4th and November 18th of 1965. The White House dinner was on November 17th, 1965. Moving on to Wales, in Season 3, Episode 3, Aberfan, the disaster occurred on October 21st, 1966. 140,000 cubic yards of black slurry was what ended up killing 144 people, many of whom were school children. The Queen's visit was on October 29th, so it was 8 days later, which is pretty accurately depicted on the episode, or in the episode, in terms of dates or relative time. In Season 3, Episode 4, Bubbikins, the military coup of Greece, was April 21st, 1967. There was a counter coup by the king on December 13th, 1967. That's my source for that was actually Wikipedia, but then I had a literary source that I couldn't track down, so there won't be a link for that in the show notes, but there will be links for all of this other stuff. Then in Season 3, Episode 5, Coup, November 18th, 1967, is when Wilson devalued the pound from 280 to 240. And they specifically used those figures when he was talking to the Queen Also, at some point, I'm not sure it was even in that episode, but there was a point where 280 and 240 were brought up. That's the date that occurred. Going back to Bubbikins, the 4th episode, the documentary The Royal Family, which we saw being filmed and then watched the Royal Family Watch. It was aired on the BBC on June 21st, 1969. The filming actually began back in 1968. And according to History.com, the idea was not actually Philip's, but the son-in-law of his royal cousin, Lord Mountbatten, Lord Brabourne, was the person who actually came up with the idea. Although it is stated, if you read anywhere, that Philip, being very progressive, was wholeheartedly behind the idea of doing it. Back to Bubbikins again. Philip's Meet the Press interview actually occurred on November 9th, 1969. And I confirmed that was all placed out of order in a book called the Crown Official Companion Volume 2, written by Robert Lacey. And I'll post you a video link of that interview in the show notes. Final bit of history here. May of 1969, according to the Radio Times, the Queen and Porchy did take a 4-day fact-finding trip to France and America to investigate various stables and studding practices regarding the horses. So there you go. There's your information. I've bored you to the point that it's time to play another game.
A game?
Yes. It's the one where we try to decide who needs more sugar in their tea because they're so grumpy, if 1 lump or 2. So, here we go. Here's our results from our last podcast episode. Again, we put these polls up at Lilibet Pod on Twitter. You might find them retweeted at the word double the letters PHQ on Twitter as well, so that you can vote for this week's stuff. But last time around, we came up with a couple of questions regarding who needed more sugar in their tea, a young Prince Philip or a young Prince Charles. We should also mention that young Uhtred, son of Uhtred, did make an appearance in that flashback in episode 4.
You did?
Yeah, so here we go. We had 900 votes on the 100 Twitter, which means that essentially 6 of you voted for the fact that young Charles needed more sugar in his tea than young Philip.
Okay.
And then we had one other vote, 700 votes on the 100 Twitter. Essentially 4 out of 7 of you voted that the person who booked Tony's train tickets, that's a triple T, needing more sugar in their tea than the person who wrote the royal announcement protocols. Time for us to play for this week's episodes. Bubba, you want to lead off with a question, sir?
Yeah, so this will be a possibly contentious debate. But we're going to go back to my least favorite episode, that final episode. And so who needs an extra lump of sugar in their tea? A guy in Mountbatten who is thinking he could be he could be prime minister, he could be in control and then isn't? Or is it Porchy? Because once again, he's got this lady pulling him around. He thinks he's going to be the queen's consort. Instead, he's the queen's horse dude. Who could use the sugar to perk them up after their brutal disappointments? Matt, you go first. Who needs that lump of sugar?
Oh, you're going to make Holly take the worst argument, huh? Because I'm going to say Porchy.
Damn it.
What?
The guy just... He's heartbroken time after time after time after time. He's married. I don't understand why he's so heartbroken, but he needs that extra sugar because he just can't get over the queen. Kind of like Jaime Lannister. He just can't get over the queen, and he has to keep coming back over and over, ascending up the ladder of horse racing. But it's all for naught. There's no prize at the end of this race. Holly?
I guess Dickie is going to need more sugar in his tea because... he got a crappy cake for his retirement party.
Man, you are obsessed with this cake. Let it go.
He got a crappy cake. He did not get to be prime minister on a failed coup. And also, I watched that video that Susan recommended. Yeah, so it's hard to be Dickie. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
Holly, how are you going to follow up that wonderful observation? Perhaps with the question of who needs more sugar in their tea?
Yeah, I guess so. Who needs more sugar in their tea? Philip, Duke of Edinburgh.
Mm-hmm.
For talking the Queen out of letting Margaret help more, or Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, for thinking his mother would ruin the documentary. There's really no wrong answer here.
Okay.
It's going to be hard to decide a winner.
You
on
go
this one,
first,
isn't it?
Matt. I think I figured out the right one, but you go first. I'll let you pick first.
And, I hope that I just totally dash it for you. I'm going to say Philip for thinking that his mother would ruin the documentary. Because he obviously is having terrible flashbacks about losing his mom, and it's keeping him from seeing the real truth. But I feel like a little bit of sugar to the brain would have pepped up his thoughts, and he would have thought a little more. He'd have been a little more bouncy, and maybe he might have come around to the fact that his mother was going to save the day anyway.
Okay, so it's my turn?
Yeah, it seems to be.
All right, so, Holly, let's be honest. She is a tricky trickster who has this Philip bias. And so we know where this is really going. She's presenting us with two options to give Philip a little extra lump of sugar. So who needs an extra lump of sugar in this specific case? The original lump of sugar. So whichever lump of sugar goes, whichever way it goes, it's going to be drank by Philip. So it needs an extra lump of sugar for the fate it's about to get, being drunk by Philip. It's Inception.
Vote on the polls, folks, at Lilibet Pod, Lilibet Pod, for Twitter. I don't know what the hell that was, but I loved it.
And he wins. Sorry, he gets.
Of course, Bubba wins. Of course, Bubba wins. All these polls will be up there for you to read. My turn, the last and most important question of all.
Let's hear it.
Who needs an extra lump of sugar in their tea? Cecil King, the media mogul, that's a double M, who wants to overthrow the government? Or Cecil Boyd Rockford, who will tell the Queen anything she wants to hear about her horse, whether it'll win or not, just so he can get out of the rain?
Well, I'll go first on this one, and I'll say it's got to be Cecil Boyd Rockford. And why is that? Because neither Holly or I remembered him. So we need to do something to get him to stand out in the episode.
And the winner by TKO in round one.
Yeah.
My God.
That's fair. I don't need an argument for that. So good. Yeah.
So give him something so he'll stand out so we remember his great work in this episode. Good work, Cecil Boyd.
Holly, you have to give a counter argument even though you're going to lose.
Okay, because Cecil King didn't get to. He needs an extra lump because he didn't get what he wanted. He didn't get his boy Dickie as prime minister, so he gets his sugar. Just vote for the other one, guys.
That's an excellent notion. Just vote for the other one. And you decide whichever one the other one is. And do so by going to @LilibetPod on Twitter.
Yes.
That's at LILIBetPod on Twitter. Or look for retweets at the word double, the letters PHQ as well. And we want to hear from you. We want to hear all of your thoughts regarding the music, regarding the episodes. Please reach out to hello at what, Bubba?
Hello at doublepmedia.com.
Or you can tweet to at the word double, the letters PHQ on Twitter or Instagram. You can message them that way. You can also go to facebook.com/the word double, the letters PHQ. Or you can leave comments on our videos. That's just by searching for Double P Media on YouTube. Or you can go to youtube.com/the word user /FITTENTRIM. That's Fit and Trim on YouTube. Guys, I was so excited to have a new composer.
Wow.
Because they changed composers out just like they changed cast members out. It seems, I don't know if Martin Phipps is going to be around for season 5 or not. Spoiler alert, he will be around for season 4.
Okay.
But I love what he did. he's a fantastic composer who hasn't done a whole lot of stuff. He's scored for a lot of miniseries. He's composed some episodes of Pinky Blinders, but he did it under a different name. And I just wanted to ask you, Bubba, did you notice? Did it come to your attention that the score was so much different than it had been in the previous 2 seasons?
I apologize to all our musical fans. I didn't. I noticed it as much as I noticed Pycelle. So, no.
There you go. He rushed through the episodes and didn't listen to.
No, I don't. I love these
underneath.
episodes. I just missed it. I apologize.
That's fine.
So, what did that mean, Matt? What in your musical brilliance? What did that mean for the show? How did it? Where's one piece of music where I can really listen and tell, oh yeah, this is definitely unique?
Well, it's great that you say that, because one of the things that Martin did, he pretty much threw almost all of the old compositions out.
Ouch.
But he used the same timbral structure that Zimmer had established, that the other composers, Gregson Williams and Lorne Balfe, had used. He used the same kind of instruments and what they represent, but he used them in a totally different way to exemplify what that meant in terms of character growth. And the perfect example of that is New Queen from the official soundtrack. That's what we're going to spend most of our time talking about here. So it's great to have Martin Phipps taking over the scoring. The duties of this had been kind of handed around. Zimmer put together this team. He created a timbral architecture, saying the brass is the power of the crown itself, saying the strings are the machinery of the people working around the crown to make the crown happen, and that the woodwinds were kind of this representation of Elizabeth, and because of the tone, it felt like the purity of the queen. And all of this was great for season 1 and 2. This is the time period in the queen's life where she is still a separate entity from the crown. The crown is still showing her who she is to be as queen. Those timbral architectures, the instruments that are used, were integral in telling the story narratively for Gregson Williams, for Lorne Balfe, for Hans Zimmer himself, to help us relate Elizabeth's relationship with the crown and how that affected everybody else around her. Now, in this new season, in this season 3, we have a different queen. Not just because it's a different actor, but this is a queen who has grown into who she is as a monarch. She is now the crown. The crown isn't something she wears, it's something that she is. And because of that, what Phipps did was absolutely brilliant. He took the whole timbral architecture and he flipped it on its head. He said, okay, if Elizabeth is in command of being the actual crown now, if she's become that good at it, I'm going to take Hans Zimmer's instruments that he used to represent the crown, and I'm now going to represent that being primarily her. And that's why in the very first scene, he brilliantly sets up who this new queen is musically by using the French horn, what we associate mostly with the crown itself, as being her. And we get these high stretching, high reaching sounds in the French horn, showing just how strong, just how far this queen can reach with melodies like this in the French horn. No longer the woodwinds, but the French horn. That is a dramatic shape. It shows you the power that she has. Partially, the timbre of the French horn itself helps to sell that a little bit, because the French horn sounds very human in that range. Even more human than in its normal range as an accompanying instrument. It sounds very individual. And that helps. And the shape reaching so high tells you what this queen is capable of. Now that she's settled in her role, now that she is timbrally the crown musically, then she also has power to use that. And we get these high reaches again, like this. The other thing that tells us that this queen, this monarch that Elizabeth has grown into, is in complete control of what's going on, is that all of the other things that we talked about before with Zimmer, the other parts of the brass, the strings, and even her emotional self, her woodwinds, are now playing second fiddle. When she calls like this, the machinery and her emotion responds. She's buried everything else down beneath her because she is now the monarch she was meant to be. And so the machinery and even her emotional self must be subservient to this French horn call with an answer like this. In the main theme, Elizabeth is the woodwinds, and then all of these strings and everything go flying around her, going super fast or super high, and the brass seems like it's coming down on top of her. No more. Now, she is the lead as the French horn. She is the crown, and all of those things that buzzed around her, the machinery, the crown itself weighing down on her from above, that is now subservient to her. It's in a lower register than the higher French horn. She is the lead. Everything happens underneath her. In perfect unison, everything follows suit in sync. It's such an amazing thing that Phipps did to show the difference between a queen that's just learning the crown to a queen who is comfortable with who she is as a monarch. And that opening scene, that's exactly what you get with Olivia Colman. She's telling you, I am what I am. She's accepted it. And a step further is the harmony of this piece that demonstrates exactly that. The harmony is major, resolved, at peace. Pythagoras, a long time ago, he didn't just think about triangles. He used to think about how math affects everything. And what he learned was we like a lot of symmetry in the way we move, but we do not like symmetry in the sounds that hit us. And what he found is that things that seemed asymmetrical tended to have a more pleasing feeling to humans. Whether things were 3 spaces apart and then 4 spaces apart, as opposed to 3 spaces or 3 spaces or 4 spaces and 4 spaces. These were the kinds of things that Pythagoras thought about when he thought about music. They still hold true. Major chords make us feel better than minor chords. Minor chords seem serious. They seem sad or even angry or even scary. But that's not the key that this piece is in. This piece resounds major, resolved. This. It's a big difference from this. And if you recall, one of the big themes in the season 1 and season 2 was also minor. It was very serious. If you recall this one from Duck Shoot. No more, not as far as the queen and her position with the crown is concerned. Everything is as it should be, resolved. Major. So he didn't just start over. He didn't just throw out Zimmer's book. He used Zimmer's book to create character development. We now have a queen who knows her role as monarch, who doesn't question what that role is anymore. There's no outside force of the emotion getting in the way too much. It's still there, but it doesn't get in the way too much. And then he built upon this one. That, by the way, if you want to listen to the full version of that theme, gosh, it's so good. You hear it at the very first scene. You also hear it at the end of episode 5. It's entitled New Queen on the season 3 official soundtrack. go listen to it in its entirety. It's just wonderful. But he takes this whole idea. French horn is the queen. Everything else is in support of that, even her emotions. And that is used for the Aberfan theme, which is the queen experiencing sad moments. That's where we saw it. When she was driving away from Winston, when she knew that he wasn't going to be there much longer. And of course, at Aberfan itself, and that's the track title that you will find this on the official season 3 soundtrack. Again, Aberfan. I think it's track 3, not sure. But at any rate, wonderful theme. It does apply minor. And I'm not going to talk about it anymore because I've already broken the other one down so much that I'm running out of time here. But I will play it for you so that you remember it when you hear it in episodes, because you do hear this sadder theme, which is in minor to indicate the seriousness and the sadness, as opposed to the major, which gives you the resolve that we've been talking about. But you hear it often in moments that are serious or sad for the queen. Once again, if you notice the shape of the melody, meaning how high it jumps, how low it drops, again, it's all done with French horn, but you'll hear this one have much more motion in it, as opposed to the one that we've been talking about, where there are these high reaches, but then always settling, because that's the stability that Elizabeth has found. This one kind of goes all over the place. It tries to reach high, and it drops down, and it even goes lower, and that's because sad moments aren't stable moments. It makes sense that a melody moves more, that it's more dramatic in sad moments. Anyway, I've been rambling enough. Here is the second part. Again, Aberfan on the season 3 official soundtrack. And then the first theme that we talked about was New Queen. Here's a sadder one, Aberfan. Listen for it when you rewatch these episodes next time. All right, so let's get to our feedback, and I put a special poll out. I may occasionally, as I did earlier in this episode, I may occasionally put a special poll out because I feel like this one's really important, because I've been harping on this for trying to work in my catfish doubles for a long time.
Yep.
And nobody seems to like them. I don't understand why you like it when Catfish does it, but you don't like it when I do it. It must just be me. So I put this poll out. After listening to our podcast covering The Crown on Netflix, you think that Matt spells the following words the following ways: philosopher, physician, philanderer, pharmacist, photographer, phonics, philanthropist, and, of course, Philip with an F. Plus, he spells flying with a PH.
Oh, my Lord.
600 votes came in on the 100 Twitter. It's almost like 4 out of 6 of you voted definitely yes. The other choice was
yes.
The other choice was yes. But
yes.
yeah, your choices were yes or definitely yes. But 4 out of 6 of you believe that it's definitely yes. That's how I spell those things. I don't. I'm college educated. I'm just trying to do the catfish bit, and it doesn't work. I'll stop, I promise.
I think you sound too intelligent to make it work. You know, when Catfish does it, it kind of actually seems,
Look,
believable. Truth in comedy is when Catfish does it.
well, it actually makes sense because I know you're educated, but you're an educated musician, right? And there's no P in the music scale, but there's a lot of Fs. There's F, so this all tracks, really.
Well, except when you get into dynamics. There's lots of P's
Don't
in dynamics.
ruin this joke, Matt. It's ruined.
No. See, that's it. I can't glam onto the joke like Catfish can. So that's just what it is. But we did get another great bit of feedback from Susan. We always love getting feedback from Susan because she gives us so much more. And she starts off by saying, "It was a pleasant surprise to find Stephanie had joined the cast on Podcast Lilibet. I agreed with her that the second half of Season 2 contained some great episodes. As always, I appreciated Bubba's information about new cast members. I would have never recognized young Philip as young Uhtred, the son of Uhtred, from The Last Kingdom. And while I'm not familiar with Babylon Berlin, I really enjoyed the the actress who played Philip's sister. She reminds me somewhat of the actress who played Eileen Parker, Chloe Peary.
Oh.
Which they do. They do kind of look a little bit alike.
Yeah.
Bubba, I don't want to spoil anything for Babylon Berlin, but Leonie Bish, I think is how you say her name, her face became so distinctive to me because of that series. I don't quite see the resemblance that maybe Susan does.
I think I see it a little bit. When you watch somebody on TV, I become so kind of stuck on their hair coloring that I maybe that overpowers it. But I agree with that look. And Susan, once again, listeners, I think all listeners would like Babylon Berlin. But I'm guessing based on some of the feedback we've read, Susan would really love it.
I think so too. Bubba, what else does she have to say?
Susan wrote, the first of these episodes here in season 3 is one of my favorites of the Crown series so far, and it's the reason why I refrained from comments about David's character before now. I fully agree with Bubba's assessment that David is a very weak character. It truly seems in retrospect that it was fortunate for England that he did choose to abdicate. The suggestion that he encouraged the Germans to continue to bomb the country in order to make Britain more amenable to surrender is extremely appalling in a long list of appalling actions. I was not sure about the historical authenticity of the position that the Duke of Windsor was seeking to undertake, or what he was offered. But something sounded familiar about him being offered the position of the special liaison to the Board of Trade. And sure enough, I found that in recent history, Prince Andrew stepped down from a very similar sounding position, the special representative for international trade and investment, because of his more recent scandals. Susan wrote, it made me wonder if there was a coincidence or if the show was trying to draw some comparison between David and Prince Andrew. Ooh, boy, that is a tough... Those two guys they know scandal. Susan continued, I was also in hearty agreement with Holly about two aspects of this episode she's talking about. I really like the focus on forgiveness and the struggles it creates for us mere mortals. And I, too, think we were robbed of the drinking scene between Philip, the Queen Mum, and Tommy Lascelles. Oh,
yes.
Brilliant points by Susan. And she's not even done.
That's right. Holly, she complimented you last, so you get to read the next part.
Awesome. Susan goes on, the second episode focusing on Margaret and Tony was interesting. I think Holly hit it right on the head by focusing on the promises they made to each other. It felt like,
Yay.
It felt like premonitions for their future unhappiness. Yes, thank you, Susan. Tony's description of the travel arrangements he had to endure compared to his half-brothers really highlighted how much class distinctions could rule your life in Britain at that time. I have no idea how much that impacts life there today, but this character was deeply affected by this. I have really mixed feelings about the Kennedy episode. I realized that the womanizing and the drug issues are part of the Kennedy story, but I remember looking up the historical accuracy of this episode the first time I saw it and learning how much was pure fabrication. At least in regards to the negative comments by Jackie Kennedy about Queen Elizabeth. Apparently, Jackie did have some unflattering comments that were reported by Gore Vidal, but nothing as scathing as depicted, and not in a drug-fueled rant at a dinner party that got back to the Queen.
That's right.
So apparently Gore Vidal was at the drug-fueled dinner party. Oh, wait, no.
Susan goes on and continues by saying, for me, the following episode, focusing on Philip and Charles, was, as you all discussed, quite emotional for numerous reasons. The Crown has done a good job of demonstrating from the beginning that Charles is very introverted and quite a contrast in temperament with his father. I actually enjoyed the little fashion montage with Charles and Dickie shopping for an Eton wardrobe.
I like that too. Good point,
too.
Susan.
Yeah, it was good. Since Matt noted how good Dickie seemed to be with children, I will say that was something stressed in his biography that I previously referenced. How Mountbatten was a good father and grandfather, took an active role in that area of his family life. But as Bubba noted, what works well for one person doesn't necessarily work for the other. It was hard not to feel sympathy for both young Charles and young Philip, but it felt most cruel to try to fit Charles into an environment that eventually became a source of growth and strength for Philip, but was a real struggle for Charles. And as a parent, I wanted Philip to recognize that for his son.
Great points. Let me go ahead and read up the last of Susan's great feedback. Listeners, if you've made it this far, you know that we love this feedback. You know we love your thoughts. Please reach out to us. Susan ended by saying, while she loves The Crown, she does continue to think that the real-life people are often shown in unflattering light for the sake of the drama.
Probably.
Yeah, I agree, Susan. She wrote, I think you all would enjoy this one real-life detail that I uncovered in the process of just checking the information. Elizabeth did meet Philip in Lisbon when he was returning from an extended tour to open the Olympics. But rather than the harsh standoff portrayed on The Crown, Elizabeth and her entire party donned fake beards to greet Philip after his beard growing contest. Oh, that is awesome.
That.
I look forward to hearing your thoughts on Season 3. I was really sorry to say goodbye to the Season 1 and 2 cast, and I appreciate that we get to see a new group of excellent actors, but I had grown quite fond of the ones. Oh, man. And so, yeah, this Mountbatten documentary on YouTube and the Garden Party website, I was joking with Susan about that on Twitter, are perfect. You can check out our podcast at Lilibet Pod on timeline to see those retweets from Susan. Oh, incredible. Once again, Susan needs a title herself. Do we want to say princess? Do we want to say duke, Duchess of Florida? Whatever she deserves, whatever she wants, we're going to give her that title. Great feedback.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much again, Susan, for that wonderful feedback. And that should bring us to the conclusion of this episode of Podcast Lilibet. We want to hear from you. Tweet at the word double, the letters PHQ on Twitter, or at LilibetPod, LILIBetPod. Or you can find double PHQ on Instagram. You can go to facebook.com/the word double, the letter P for podcast, and the letters HQ for headquarters.
Amen.
And you can find the Double P Media YouTube by simply searching for Double P Media. As for our personal Twitters, well, you can just find me at LilibetPod because that's where I hang out because it's a small crowd. I'm like Elizabeth. I don't like being around big crowds. Follow me. Have some fun. Tweet at me how bad I am at hosting a podcast. I love those kind of things because, this is what I do. Anyway, Bubba, if people want to talk to you about anything going on the Double P Media, how do they do so?
I want to talk to you. I really want you to do it at LilibetPod or at Double PHQ. But if you have any issues with my ridiculous silliness, which you probably should, you can find me on Twitter at FitandTrim. That's FITTENTRIM at FitandTrim on Twitter.
And Holly, if people want to tell you that you are completely right as usual and that I am completely wrong as usual, how do they do so?
They can tell me those lies on Twitter at HuntPants. Yep, that's weird.
That's it for us. Remember, subscribe or follow. The way Apple is now, we don't really say subscribe anymore because that implies a paywall, which we're not behind. But subscribe on YouTube, subscribe wherever you get to our podcast, unsubscribe, resubscribe, download again, delete, and download yet again. Next time we'll be covering Season 3, Episodes 6 through 10, 6 through the finale. Talk to you next time on Podcast Lilibet, where the pod is the job.